So I want to be sensitive in doing this video just because I know that the timing is not great and it's never a good time to criticize a widow while she is grieving the loss of her loved one. But I also want to be honest about what I'm seeing online and what I'm feeling given the nature of what happened to Charlie Kirk on September 10th. So I've been wanting to buy a Charlie Kirk t-shirt. I've been wanting something that makes me think back to what happened to Charlie Kirk that represents his legacy as far as how I see him. And I've been going back and forth on whether or not I want to buy a shirt. And for whatever reason, I have not been able to go through with that purchase. And I don't know why that is. I know that I am a indecisive person when it comes to buying stuff. So I really want to be intentional with what I buy. I don't think it's a matter of not knowing what I want the shirt to say. There's just something that is not letting me go through with buying the shirt. And I think that this ties into this conversation because there are so many conversations happening about Charlie Kirk, about Erika Kirk, and all of that stuff. It is difficult to know whether or not you're on the right side of things. And this battle between good and evil, obviously you should want to be on the side of good. You should not want to be evil and celebrating things that you should not be celebrating, right? It also makes me question myself and whether or not what I'm actually believing and what I'm hearing and how I'm interpreting those things are actually correct. And so I think that ties into my hesitancy in buying a Charlie Kirk t-shirt because on one hand, I do believe the things I've said in my past videos, but there is that little bit of doubt that is creeping in and making me second guess myself and all of that stuff. And so really, I wanted to do a video to address the things I'm hearing about Erika Kirk. And I know that other people are kind of starting to come out and talk about this. And if you look on Twitter, people have been saying this since day one, since this happened, that they feel like something is off with the whole situation and all of that stuff. And so this is me adding my 2 cents to this conversation. And hopefully this will help me move forward in adjusting how I feel about the whole situation. And the other thing that's given me hesitancy with this conversation is the fact that I still, even after 7 or 8 videos at this point, I still feel like I cannot pinpoint or accurately convey the depth of what Charlie Kirk meant. I know that for many people he means one thing, for other people he means something completely different, and just not even being able to comprehend or accurately put into words his impact on the world is pretty crazy. And I think the biggest takeaway is that this whole situation has motivated people to go to church, pick up a Bible, and that is a really good thing. But within all of that, there could still be potential for evil happening, right? And so I think there's a bigger conversation here around so many different topics. This is Hey Brittany, welcome back. Okay, so let's get into some concerns and issues that have been raised regarding Erika Kirk. So some of these are conspiracy theories and I don't know a whole lot about them, so I'm not even going to spend much time at all talking about these different things. But I've seen on social media the honeypot allegation. I know that she's been connected to the pageant world and to Trump. I've also heard that she appeared in some music video and people are trying to find all of these kind of, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is, but there's all of these like hints in the music video that kind of point to what happened to Charlie Kirk. And people have been referencing the movie Snake Eyes, where I think the character's name is Charlie Kirkson or something like that. And then there's someone with a variation of a name, Tyler Robertson. In that movie, it might be Tyler Roberts. I'm not 100% sure. And so there are a lot of conspiracy theories floating around. And in addition, people are talking about some organization that Erika Kirk works with in Romania. And then also people are saying that her parents have government contracts. And so there are all of these different things that are floating around on social media. And I'm not really going to address that because I don't know a whole lot about each of those different things that I mentioned. But I do want to share what I saw and what I felt about what I saw in terms of her first speech, the memorial, and all of that stuff. There is one clip that I want to address that's not connected to either one of those. In the midst of everything happening with Charlie Kirk, I did see a video of Erika Kirk because I did not know who she was prior to what happened on September 10th. And I saw this video and basically she's wearing this really floral outfit. It's kind of ugly in my opinion. But anyway, the clip that I saw is kind of her. She's kind of being elevated, and so I don't know if she's on like a moving something, and she has like an earpiece in, and she's giving a speech of sorts, right? And for whatever reason, when I saw that clip, it was just a 10-second clip. I don't even know what she was talking about, but it really gave me Britney Spears energy, like she was at a concert and it was all about her and all of that stuff, right? Other than that, I don't really have any other impressions of that speech because, again, I don't know what the topic was, but that did give me kind of like this image of who I think she is or what she's all about just based on that clip that I saw and the energy, the outfit, and all of that stuff, how she presented herself. Now let's get into Erika's first speech. So a lot of people had comments about this one, and in terms of the title of the speech, so I saw it and I think it said Erika Kirk addresses the nation, and so that is an interesting title because when you think of someone addressing the nation, you think of like a president or something like that, and they're speaking to everyone. Everyone is invested in hearing what this person has to say, and so I don't know if the title is more about Erika Kirk herself or if it's about the situation that happened to Charlie, and so I just found it interesting that it was labeled in that way or titled in that way because the title conveys importance, but at the same time, what happened to Charlie Kirk did capture national interest, and it does have national implications as far as how we interact with each other culturally, socially, and politically. And in the first speech, people were really thrown off by her whispering to herself, and really she was just whispering and speaking to Charlie, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later on, but I did just want to go ahead and mention that now. Now, as far as her appearance, she had a very basic black and white outfit on. A lot of people are talking about the symbolism with that. I'm not really going to get into that, but she did have, I don't know if she had makeup on. I would assume that she had makeup on, but she also looked very kind of like washed out. She's white, so she's pale. She has long blonde hair, so that is essentially pale as well. And then she has light colored eyes, and so that is in a sense pale. And so everything was just pale. And then she also looked very menacing. Like you could tell that she was pissed off, she was upset, she was angry, and that came out in her speech. And so I think that ties into how she appeared in her second speech. And then the other thing that people commented on was her rings. I think you could see this in the first speech, but you could definitely see it in the video that was filmed of her sitting beside Charlie's coffin. And so people were pointing out the G ring that she was wearing, and that's connected to different like sex and all of that stuff. We won't get into that because it's very Da Vinci Code, and that's not something I want to dig into in this video. But I did find it interesting that there were all of these little things that people were pointing out, and some of it I noticed in real time, but I also was swept up in the emotion of the event and everything that was happening, and so everything resonated and connected for me on a emotional level. And in the first speech, people did not like all of the fundraising talk or the recruitment efforts to get more people to join TPUSA. And then also, I think following that first speech, there's been a lot of emails and texts that have gone out with basically encouraging people, asking people to donate money, and so people in a sense are turned off by that, especially with her having been a millionaire in her own right, and then Charlie Kirk should have been worth like 12 million or something like that, and so this is a family that has a lot of money, and here they are asking for donations. Now let's get into the memorial service. Now I really stand by what I said in the first video on my experience of the memorial. I did not attend it. I watched it remotely, and I basically was watching it almost from 11 a.m. to about 7 something because it started at 2 p.m. and they started the live stream early, and so I was paying attention during the important parts, and then at times I may have taken a break or just looked away from the screen because it was an extremely long day. And what resonated the most with me was the worship part of it, and I also talked about the speeches and some of the major things that I found important, but a lot of people had problems with the other parts of the speeches that were given. Obviously some of it was scripted, but also in a sense people really did not like the display of Christian nationalism, and they thought that this was inappropriate for a funeral or a memorial service. Now, as far as the music, I did like the moment where Brandon Lake was singing one of his songs, Gratitude, and then he asked the audience to sing along with him, and it was really beautiful how you could just hear everyone basically singing the song. They all had their hands in the air, and it was just really a unique and beautiful moment to witness. But But one thing I do want to point out is that I didn't realize that this is something that he does when he performs a song. I did find a clip from like 3 months ago, and I guess this is a concert of his, and the audience members are doing this exact same thing. And so that did change my perspective a little bit, or at least that moment hit differently, knowing that this is something that is kind of planned, or that you're going to ask the audience to do this. It's not like this was just a moment that happened organically and people just started singing the song all together and all of that stuff, right? So in a sense, this is something that he would have expected to happen, but I do think that the moment was still beautiful because this was not an event that was all about him, Brandon Lake. So this was not his concert, this was not his fans in attendance, this was people who were there for Charlie Kirk, and they may know Brandon Lake's songs or they may not. And so I think the fact that he was able to get everyone to do this, I think it speaks volumes about the energy in the room. I was watching a show that Nick did, and I don't know when he did this because it was someone basically showing his clips on YouTube and then basically giving their observations or their rebuttal or whatever to Nick was saying. And one of the things that Nick pointed out was that he didn't like the focus on talking about Erika Kirk being the new CEO. And I found this super interesting because I know that this was something that they announced and they were really happy and celebrating this. And I think it is interesting that they had 2 women who were talked about as potentially being the next person to run Turning Point USA. So we had Eric Bolling mention that Candace Owens would have been the next heir or the heir to the TPUSA throne if they didn't fall out, which she kind of disproved they were always friends and they were still in touch. And then the other person is Erika Kirk. So I find it interesting. People say that Charlie Kirk is a misogynist, but there's 2 women who are in the running for taking over his company, so to speak. I haven't heard of the names of men being thrown into the ring as the next person to the TPUSA. Now, in terms of her being named as the next CEO, I felt like this was more so portrayed as like this huge achievement or accomplishment when it was just kind of like following what Charlie Kirk wanted. Obviously, she's his wife and she's involved in everything behind the scenes and he talked to her and all of that stuff, but it didn't seem like this was something that she got because of how impressive she was. It was just what Charlie Kirk wanted, right? That's a really weird way to say it, but the other thing that I want to point to is the fact that they are really harping on the fact that she was named the next CEO. I feel like that's something that you do when you feel like the business is about to be taken away from the family or the business is at risk of being put under someone else's leadership and you don't want that person to be the leader of your company. So I feel like that was the energy behind it, because did they not know if she was going to be able to be the CEO? Because if you know that she's going to be the CEO, you don't have to really rush to make that announcement. And I wonder how much of that was because they did not want the business to fall apart or to no longer function if they didn't react quickly to everything, because again, this is a whole business that is centered around Charlie Kirk, and he's the CEO, he's the founder of the company, he is the core of the company. So without him, what exactly is Turning Point USA? The other thing that was noticeable about the memorial service was that they used fireworks, and so people did not like this because they compared it to the Super Bowl and the WWE, and Nick had a funny where he basically said, hey, she came out like Batista and whatever, and so obviously people were just making jokes about how over the top the memorial service was. And one thing I wanted to comment on in terms of the fireworks, I saw 2 explanations for this. One was that Charlie Kirk loved fireworks, and so they wanted to include that in the memorial service. The other thing was that the fireworks were potentially a distraction if there were shooters or whatever in the audience who were targeting any one of the speakers. And so those 2 things make a whole lot of sense to me. But again, if you were expecting this to be a funeral or overly sad, that was not the energy of this memorial service. And I really try to think back to Nipsey's memorial service and Kobe Bryant, and obviously those were much more low-key events, but also those events did draw a large crowd, and I think both were in stadiums, and so that's not unexpected to hear of huge people gathering together to honor and celebrate one person. And if it is over the top, I think that that's totally okay, but people are going to take away whatever they take away from these different events that are being put on to celebrate someone's life. Now let's get into Erika's speech. So her entrance and exit. I noticed that she made an effort to stop and look at the crowd before her speech, and she did the same thing after her speech as she was leaving the stage. And so this did feel a little bit performative because the attention was already on her. I get that she's taking in the energy and just like seeing all of those people, because when you do look at the footage and you see how many people exactly were in that room, it is amazing to know that they are all there for one person. This is not a concert. This is not a team playing. This is everybody in the arena to honor one single person. And in that sense, it is impressive. And again, I don't know if she saw any of this prior to her making her speech. So I can absolutely understand her wanting to take in the energy and just absorb the moment. But there were times that did feel performative. I do want to talk about her appearance because I want to contrast it to the first speech. So the first speech, she looked menacing. Everything was kind of washed out, pale skin, pale hair, light colored eyes. And so in this speech, it seems like she went through an effort to look more either her normal self or to look more innocent compared to that first speech, because she had a poof, and it's kind of like the poof that Snooki does, and I didn't really like it, but whatever. I do like Snooki though. I do love watching Jersey Shore. And so anyway, she had the poof, she had the eyeliner on, I don't know, and mascara too. And then so she just looked more innocent compared to her first speech. And I think that might have been done intentionally, because either one, that's how she normally looks, or they were trying to contrast how she looked in the first speech. A lot of people didn't think that she was crying, and they thought that her wiping her tears was performative or her acting. And I thought it was interesting that she kept using the same tissue to wipe her eyes and all of that stuff, because if you're wiping your eyes and it's really wet, you're going to need to change tissue at some point. And we didn't really see her do that. And she could have been doing that behind the stand and we just couldn't have seen that. But I don't know if that was necessarily performative. There were other things that I feel like were kind of out of the norm. It would lead you to conclude that they were performative without actually being able to 100% verify, hey, she's just acting here. She's just putting on a show and trying to make you feel sorry for her. I did think that her cadence was different when she was speaking in these two speeches, specifically the second speech. I felt like she spoke in a slower cadence. My husband, like that type of energy, normally she just be like, my husband. Like she has a specific tone and quality to her voice, and I don't know how to describe it, but it's very different from how she gave her second speech. And so I think that people were reacting to that. I did have a emotional reaction to her second speech. I did get emotional and cry, or at least tear up, and I could feel kind of sorry for her and feel bad for her and understand how heavy that situation must have been to have to make a speech to all of these people about your husband, when that's probably the last thing that you want to do when you're emotionally overwhelmed, and then also having to forgive your husband's killer. I mentioned this in the last video that I did, that I felt like the way that she showed up when she was hosting the Charlie Kirk show, I felt like that was her normal self. She was free of makeup, but she still looked beautiful, and then she was talking in her normal way. So I think that if she had shown up to the first speech and the second speech in that way, I think people would have connected with her a little bit more. But at the same time, people are saying, hey, she's smiling, she's happy, and it's too quick. It seems like she got over everything, and people are having back and forth conversations on what grief looks like, and is she acting or reacting in a appropriate way. I do want to say that I did see a backstage clip of her after she spoke and after Trump spoke. I think Trump might be making a joke and she's kind of laughing and smiling, but she also looks really sad. And so I think she may have let her guard down in a sense when she was backstage, but when she's on camera and she knows she has to be on and she has to represent her family and Charlie a certain way, I think that may lead to the buttoned up kind of performative image that we see, because again, she is from the pageant world and they always try to give perfect answers and dress things up, and so I can kind of see that coming out to play here. So I don't know if everything was performative, but there were things that did seem performative. Moving on, I want to talk about grief and being a devout Christian woman. So a lot of people are saying that they don't really know how real her grief is, basically. And I do agree that grief looks different for different people. Some people can have a traumatic event happen to them and they're able to not easily move on, but they are able to appear as if it doesn't affect them as badly as you would think it would. And some people cannot cope. They shut down, they shut themselves off from the world, and they literally cannot function until months or years later. And to give an example of myself, I had a dog that passed away about 2 years ago, and he actually died in my arms. And one thing that we talk about is we talk about Benji as if he was still alive. Obviously, we know that he's no longer here with us, but spiritually he is, and we'll talk about him as if he's doing things with us, with the understanding that his physical body is not here, but spiritually he is. So it's not like we're doing anything crazy. We're not leaving his food out and saying, oh, he ate it when the food is gone. Like, we're nothing like that, but we are just including him and just carrying on and speaking as if he's still here in the spiritual sense. And so I think that this is kind of what she's doing when she's whispering to Charlie. She's speaking as if he's still here or as if he's still with her. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that points to how someone is grieving and how someone is handling the situation, because in the sense of my dog passing away, if I only thought about, oh, he's not here, oh, I can't put food out for him anymore, or oh, he's not going to be able to sit on my lap, or I'm not going to be able to hug him, that's a very negative way to think about it. But when you think about it, oh, I can still talk to him, I can still act as if he's still here and with me spiritually, that is a much different way to look at the situation. And I think that that's a more positive way, and it allows you to move on and to also accept and process the situation. Whereas if you're only thinking about it in the negative sense and you're reminding yourself that he's not here and I can't do X, Y, and Z, I think that makes it more painful to deal with the trauma of the situation. This was actually something that Lauren London spoke about with Nipsey passing away. So Nipsey was murdered and it was caught on tape, and you don't see it the same way that you saw Charlie Kirk's murder, but I think she did an interview at some point and she was basically saying that in their household they talk about Nipsey as if he's still alive, and obviously she means in the spiritual sense. And so that was something that I recall hearing or reading about in that interview that she gave, and that helped me with my dog Benji passing away and knowing that I could still talk about him as if he was here. And so I think that is what Erika Kirk is doing when she's whispering to herself. It may seem like she's being crazy or she's being performative, but I think that is what's helping her process this situation. And then people are also talking about the fact that she's able to appear like she's not as affected, because I think people really want her to be hysterical and breaking down and not able to function. They don't like seeing that she is able to process this and kind of not necessarily move on with her life, but she's able to put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And so I think that is super important, and it is something that should be acknowledged and celebrated, because again, people deal with grief in different ways, and she's the CEO of a new company. She has a family to take care of. She doesn't have the luxury in a sense to fall apart and just abandon everything, you know what I mean? And I think that that's what people want her to do. Now, when it comes to how she's speaking in the first speech and the second speech that I mentioned, in the second speech, her cadence is different, and I think that this is probably, I guess, like a personality change in terms of experiencing a traumatic event. It could be an effort to keep herself together and compose herself in front of an audience, because I would imagine she probably doesn't feel like she has the luxury or the option of completely breaking down, because a lot of people were emotional hearing her second speech. You could see the people in the audience visibly upset and emotional, and I think that if we really saw how upset and frustrated and sad and hurt she was, I think people would just be crying and unable to handle seeing that level of despair and sadness. Moving on, I want to talk about Turning Point USA. So going back to this whole confusion I have on whether or not I should buy a t-shirt to celebrate Charlie Kirk, this is really making me think about what's next for Turning Point USA. So I think I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, but I actually did not watch Charlie Kirk's show or anything associated with Turning Point USA. I really just saw clips of whatever events they were hosting and the debates on social media. So at the most, I saw maybe a 10-minute minute clip, but it was nothing really more than that. And so again, where does Turning Point USA go from here? They lost the CEO and the founder of their company. Charlie Kirk was the core of Turning Point USA. And I think what a lot of people don't realize or are not maybe acknowledging is that this is not just some random CEO who was leading Turning Point USA. This was the founder. So how do you move on when the person who is holding all of this together is no longer here? And so in that sense, I feel like Turning Point USA is almost a done organization. Even though they're trying to go on, they're trying to continue, I think that it's a very different company without Charlie Kirk, and a lot of people were watching the event, going to the events and all of that stuff and supporting them because Charlie Kirk was there. And so I don't know that they're going to get the same level of support long term once people get over the initial shock of what happened on September 10th. In relation to Charlie Kirk's show, Erika did host it recently, and people were commenting on how she was upbeat, she was smiling, and she just seemed unaffected by his death, which is kind of a cold way to say that, but that's basically what people are saying. And so I think this goes again to how you can have the idea of someone is still alive and they're still with you in the spiritual sense versus looking at it like, oh, he's not here, he's never going to sit in this chair again, and being super upset. Because there was one moment, I don't know if people caught it, but she was talking and they went to the break, and I think when they go to commercial break they always show his chair, something like that, and his microphone, and you could see her touching it. And so I just think that people have different ways of processing grief, and people are expecting her to basically fall apart so they can say, hey, this proves that she's really upset. It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if she was weak and she fell apart, people be like, oh, she's not in a position to run the company, she's a woman, she can't run the company and all of that stuff. But if she's too strong, or if she doesn't show her emotion, then it means that she doesn't care, or she is faking it and she's acting and all of that stuff. And so it is difficult to be in that position where no matter what you do, it's not the right thing. Going into her reaction, I did see people saying, hey, she shouldn't be doing this. She should be with her kids. She shouldn't be able to leave the house. It should be years before she's even able to talk about Charlie and all of that stuff in relation to the first speech and the second speech, and then this appearance on the Charlie Kirk show. And I saw one article where it was basically saying that, I guess right after the shooting happened, she was unable to wash his towels. And so she was really going through this effort to preserve the last things that he touched and used, which is really sad when you think about it, because once she washes those towels or wipes down the counters or whatever, he's not there anymore, right? His physical imprint on the space is no longer there. And so that is really sad when you think about that she has those constant reminders in her home that he's never going to come back into that space. And it's the same thing with going to his studio where he records his show. But again, if you frame it in a positive light, like, hey, he's still here positively, and you have those conversations where you see her whispering or talking to Charlie, I think that is a source of comfort. Because if you look at it in the other way, in the negative way, I think that you will really lose it and fall apart. Now, as far as my connection to Turning Point USA, I never watched Charlie Kirk's show while he was alive, and I really only know about Charlie Kirk because of Candace Owens, and ironically, I only know about Candace Owens because of Charlie Kirk. And so that's really weird when you think about it, because I did start watching Candace Owens when she joined Daily Wire, and they always reference Prager University and also Turning Point USA. And so that was really how I came to learn about who Charlie Kirk was, even though I didn't really consume his content and just saw clips here and there. And in an effort to continue the Charlie Kirk show and the campus debates, we've seen different people going to college campuses and debating. We've seen different speeches and events held. And I saw one with Megyn Kelly recently where she was taking questions from the audience. And basically the comment section was saying that she reacted to the question that was asked in a defensive and a lawyery kind of way. And so they were saying, this is not what Charlie Kirk does. Nobody else is going to be able to do it the way that he does, and it's not going to be effective. And people are trying to do what he did, and they're not going to be able to live up to that. And so I am wondering how long term this is going to turn out, because one, you were going to these events and these debates because you wanted to debate Charlie Kirk. Now you have other people that you may want to also debate, but it's not going to have the same energy. It's not going to have the same vibe. It's not going to have the same tone, because these people that are now replacing Charlie Kirk, they have their own speaking styles. They have their own way of answering questions. They have their own way of engaging with the audience. And so it's going to look very different. And for me personally, going back to the Charlie Kirk show, I don't have an interest in watching it and seeing what they're saying, because I know that it's not the same show that it once was. And so I think that it is good that they want to continue the show and continue Charlie Kirk's legacy, but I also think that Turning Point USA is basically going to have an identity crisis, because who are they now without Charlie Kirk? What do they represent? What do they stand for? And how do they retain their audience without Charlie Kirk? Who is going to be the thing that draws people to Turning Point USA? And for me personally, I don't necessarily want to see new episodes of the Charlie Kirk show. I would much rather go and watch his old content or whatever is already available. And I know that Erika Kirk said that they have so much footage that hadn't been released and that he had a plan through 2030, and so I am interested in seeing that, but I'm not necessarily interested in other people trying to replace Charlie Kirk or fill in his seat or keep it warm or whatever, right? And so I would actually just rather hear from Charlie Kirk himself and what he has to say, and I think either unreleased content being released is what would keep my interest, and then also watching his older content that is already available. Alrighty, so to wrap up this episode, I hope we've covered a lot of the different things that are being talked about as it relates to Charlie Kirk, Erika Kirk, and Turning Point USA. I am really curious to see where we go from here in regards to Erika Kirk. I know that people have been talking about her speeches and saying that they were really good, and then people have also been saying that she does have a political future. Maybe she'll run for president one day, who knows? And so I am curious to see where she goes from here, especially as more time has passed since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I'm especially curious to see if Erika Kirk does get into politics or anything like that, because they were saying that she's more conservative than Charlie Kirk, and a lot of people didn't like what Charlie Kirk had to say and what he stood for. And so I would be interested, if she does get into the political space, what exactly is going to be her messaging? What is going to be her rhetoric? How is she going to communicate that outside of these two speeches that she had? What is her brand going forward? And so I'm interested in seeing where she goes from here. So that's everything for this video. Let me know in the comment section what you think about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, Erika Kirk taking over as CEO, Erika Kirk in general, and Turning Point USA. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.